This is the lesson 4, comparing local networking and hardware. I think between lesson 4 and 5 is probably almost half of some of the largest amount of content in the core 1. These are chapters that you really need to focus on. You really need to address one way or another. These are the chapters that I think, if you were to compare them to other chapters, I think the other chapters you can study a lot with regular questions and understanding the vocabulary. But with lesson 4 and 5, I think there's a big demand for not only knowing the vocabulary, but also knowing the concepts and the processes, as well as the acronyms. So that's why these chapters start to get deeper. So let's get started here. So comparing local network hardware. Here we go, lesson 4. So we have compare network types, which is huge. That's going to be questions. Compare networking hardware, even more questions. Network cable types, which you start early on in, chapter 1, connectors and cables, and, chapter 2. But here it's going back to making sure you understand what they're for, and new ones. Compare wireless networking types. So compare network types, 4A. So it's important, you'll see these sections. There are also good ways of understanding how each lesson is kind of framed, and also what types of questions you're going to receive. How do you compare different types of networks, and what's the differences? And you want to know what the differences are. So here we have LANs and WANs. Local area network is a LAN. It has the Ethernet IEEE 802.3. Then we have the wireless local area network, the WLAN. That's Wi-Fi. If you notice, the IEEE 802.11. And then we have the WAN, the wide area network, multiple geographic locations, use of intermediate public or service provider networks. And then we have a metropolitan area network, the MAN. So those are 4 types of networks. Make sure you understand the difference between them. LAN and WLAN should be the easiest ones to remember. One's Ethernet and one's Wi-Fi. But you are potentially probably going to receive a question which asks you what type of network is most likely going to be the type of network used in certain types of situations, and they're going to include the WAN and the MAN as potential options. You want to make sure you know which ones make the most sense. Now, SOHO and enterprise networks, you need to remember that SOHO and enterprise, not only are we going to talk about the differences here, but similarities, but at the same time, you're going to have most likely a PBQ related to small office networks. All right. So it's important to kind of start to understand the terminology, so that when you start to study for that small office network at home, that you understand what they're talking about, so that you can address it. So a small office, home office, SOHO network is a single appliance, provides Ethernet, Wi-Fi, and internet connectivity. So here you have a SOHO wireless router implements all the functions for local network and internet connectivity. A digital modem in the router connects to the internet via an internet service provider ISP network. All right, so you see it comes in from the outside, from the public, goes into the router, and then off of that router, switches and ports. Switch ports and a wireless access point create a local private network, so within the home or small office. Okay, so that's the basic configuration. The wireless router with switches and ports, local and small in the home. You might have a couple different devices, but you also have wireless, and then you have the connection coming in, being provided from an outside service provider. Okay. And then SOHO and enterprise networks. So now we're going to talk about enterprise networks. They're all about reliability, and scalability in a module design. So now I'm going to draw your attention down here to where the internet symbol is. Internet comes into a building. It is brought into the building. There's a core distribution. And what's going to happen is, internet with internet service providers, with routers, DMZ, remote access VPN, mainly within an enterprise network, you're going to have this core distribution. This is the center of the enterprise network. You're going to have work group switches that are then going to manage patch panels and also other switches. So this patch panel right here creates a wired, you can create, there's a couple different types of connections here. You see this, the patch panel, and then you see wired devices. Then you see a workgroup switch with an access point with wireless devices. Then you have a switch with printers and a network server. So this is essentially a print server, okay? So you have a print server that has this switch. You have a patch panel, which is connecting, these wired devices. But then you also have a workgroup switch that's doing the access points. So what you're going to find is there's this center of the building where the connection comes into the building. That's the blue squares and how the internet connects in. And then they're going to go out to these workgroup switches. They're either going to be utilized for wireless access to an access point or a patch panel with wired devices as well. And then down here, we have another switch off this core distribution for a print server. The print server is a server that's going to allow people to connect to different printers through IP printing, okay, generally, so that you can print to another location in a building through finding the IP that is connected to that connection. So hopefully I explained that kind of decently to understand the basics here, but you have this core distribution, then you have a switch here for the printers, and then you have these work group switches. These work group switches are essentially connecting parts of the building to the network. They're kind of the connector piece, all right? And when they say reliability and scalability, this technology is consistent. There are consistencies in the types of products, so it's the same. And then it's modular. So modular means like these sections, here's the workgroup switches, this is the wireless, this is the patch panel for wired. It's when you're scaling it out, it's scaling it out utilizing the same hardware. Data centers and storage area networks. So a data center is a facility dedicated to hosting servers, networking, power, climate control, and physical access control features. So essentially a data center is just a very large, warehouse style building that essentially holds servers, like a server farm, to manage data. Data comes in, it gets managed, stored, organized, sent back out, over and over and over and over again. Google has a lot of data centers. Amazon has a lot of data centers. All of these services that provide cloud computing have massive data centers. And they also have redundancy for the data center. So not only do they have one large building somewhere that is a bunch of servers, they have other locations which also have the same data as a backup. So they're creating redundancy so that if something were to ever happen to one of their data centers, they wouldn't be out of luck, So they're very focused on just, backing up, storing, and moving data all of the time. Then we have storage area network. This is a SON, network hosting configurable pool of storage devices. Clients of the network are application servers, not ordinary workstations. Clients treat storage as logical disk, fiber channel, and internet, SCSI. So this would be storage on a local local space. So basically, if you're working on a desktop, on a network, you're able to access, some accessible storage that is probably backed up in redundancy, and a place for you to be able to save things. And it's treated like a logical disk. It's a location. So you do need internet and a very quick connection. And it's also on a network. So, other features that you wouldn't necessarily have at home all the time. Then you have personal area networks, wireless and cellular connections over a few meters, PC and smartphone, smartphone, peripheral devices, Internet of Things, and wearable technology. So these are networks between like your phone and your watch, your phone and your heating system, your watch and your heating system, any sort of Internet of Things kind of technology that connects different devices together through wireless and cellular connections over a few feet. So personal area networks. So when we review network types, to break it down and try to simplify it, we have LANs and WANs, SOHO and enterprise, data centers and storage area networks, and personal area networks. So when studying, I would recommend actually, start, if you're looking to break down this chapter, go to this slide and just ask yourself, like, do I understand the differences between these types of networks? What are these items? Do I understand the definitions? And you can even quiz yourself. And I would say, if you wanted to, you could, write down vocabulary related to these terms and just see how much you know. And just test yourself. Okay, so here are some lab activities to consider with lesson 4. Assisted lab, explore the virtual machine lab environment. That's basically an orientation lab designed to help you learn how to use a lab interface and operate a virtual machine that you will use to complete a task. We got a chance to talk a little bit about virtual machines and how they function, but virtual machines are essentially can be used to help test software, and basically it's a computer within a computer. And we talked a little bit about that at the boot camp. Assisted labs guide you through, step-by-step tasks. So within this curriculum, this particular one, they had lab on doing the virtual machine. So that's just the description. All right. So comparing network hardware now is part of lesson 4B. Network interface cards, NICs. You'll see them also referenced as NICs. We have media type transceiver, electrical versus optical, number of ports, framing and addressing, media access control address, the MAC address, source and destination, hex notation. So you essentially see a lot of those elements here. You see an IP address, you see the hex notation on the bottom, you see the source and destination of, Wi-Fi connections here with the protocol, the destination, what type of destination broadcast it is, and the media types. All right, let's talk about patch panels. So on the back of a patch panel, now this is definitely like a question as well. I think you've probably seen in doing practice questions, this being addressed as a question. And you can refer back to where patch panels are on a large enterprise network in the first couple slides. But the thing to remember is on the back of a patch panel, terminate cabling from wall ports to insulation displacement connector, IDC blocks. So that's what you see. You see those terminated cables from wall ports. On the front, you see the modular RJ45 connectors, and we've talked about what type of connector that is, and that is also in the connectors, chapter 1, lesson 1. Use patch cords to connect to connect to switch ports. So that is the patch cords connecting to the switch ports from the patch panels. All right, that's the function of the patch panels. Then we have a network hub. And I think with the networking stuff, you know, break it down into sections like this. Patch panels, what do they do? Hubs, what do they do? And then as you start to see, the components come together, then start to kind of like put the ideas together in terms of how they work together. Because then you'll be able to kind of understand the function of each part and what it means. So here we have hubs, star topology wiring. So a topology is a network design. Essentially a star is where, something's in the center and then it goes out. So you see, here, you have the hub, all ports are in the same collision domain, performance reduced by contention, half duplex, 10/100 millibytes per second, Ethernet only. So this is a star topology center of a network. So basically you see these clients connecting to a switch in the center. Okay, that's basically all it's saying. It's like it's a star. This is in the center. You have these items, these clients coming off of it. So that's what they mean by a star topology, is the shape. All right, switches. Same star topology, each host cabled to a switch port. So we just saw a basic star topology. Now we're looking at a star topology with each host cabled to a switch port. So a host is essentially, a device, right? By learning MAC addresses. So switch forwards traffic to specific destination port by learning MAC addresses. Allows each port to operate at full duplex and full speed, required for gigabit Ethernet and better. So if we read through this real here, we have host AA sends a frame to BC. All right, AA to BC. AA here, and then you see BC here. All right, the switch receives the frame into a port buffer and reads the destination MAC address from the Ethernet frame. The switch uses its MAC address table to look up the port connected to the destination MAC address. The switch uses its high-speed backplane to send the frame out on port G5 for host BC to receive, creating a temporary virtual circuit. None of the other connected devices see any activity on the network while this process takes place. Those other devices are able to transmit and receive at the same time. So each one can send and receive its own message, but this is just an example of one going through, but it doesn't prevent the others from doing it. And you also see this is the table to look up the port connected to the desk. So we have port, switch, switch port, MAC, all right? So here you see kind of the table they're talking about. So we have unmanaged and managed switches. So an unmanaged switch works without configuration. A managed switch has a configuration interface, additional functionality, enterprise module switches, Weber command line interface. So if you just have like a 3 or 4 port switch and you put the network into one end and then want to connect off of it with 2 other ports with an RJ45, you can, but it's a unmanaged switch. It doesn't need to be configured, but it's also not doing much that's very complicated. Then you have a managed switch, which has a configuration interface. It needs to be configured. It has additional functionality, like it might have power over Ethernet, power over Ethernet. It's enterprise module switches. So it's designed to work in an enterprise environment with additional access points and connected clients. And it has a web or command line interface. So the way it's managed is through a web interface where there might be a piece of software from a company, or a command line interface, which means that through the command line, like a CLI or Linux-based kind of command system for managing the switch and configuring how it's set up. And then here is power over Ethernet. So power over Ethernet is essentially, providing power through Ethernet. through an Ethernet cable. So there are standards 802.3AF, 802.3AT, 802.3BT, and then we have a PoE-enabled switch, which is kind of like what I was mentioning before with, the capabilities of a switch to be, power PoE-enabled. And then we have an injector and midspan. So one thing you want to think about is, for VoIP, for example, Voice over Internet Protocol works best on PoE switches because they need power. They need power to run. So, a phone system that runs over a switch needs power. So you just want to realize where, PoE comes into play and where it doesn't, and then what are the standards. You'll probably have some sort of question related to switching that could connect to PoE internet, but it's really important just to know what its main function is and how it's different than a non-PoE switch. So the review activity for network hardware is there's network interface cards, the NIC cards, patch panels, hubs, switches, unmanaged and managed switches, power over Ethernet. So once again, a good place that you could even start with these terms to study and work your way backwards if you wanted to. The lab net activity related to the network is comparing network hardware. Use the GNS3 network simulator to configure an Ethernet network. So if I were to take this and just do a search on this, let's see. I have found a video, let's see, from Domots. So this is a network simulator where they are creating, looks like they're going to create a basic network layout with a simulator. This is called the GNS3 network simulator, which has different end devices on the left side. So they're able to create different connections. This is pretty cool. So definitely a tool worth checking out just for the sake of, playing with it, seeing what it's, this is a PC, so they're just making a simple connection. And then that is a command line tool right there, similar to a command line tool. So they're going to run a ping command to check the connection of the network. So that's pretty cool. So if you get a chance, check out that tool. Let me go back and do my sharing. Okay. All right. So that's a network simulator to configure an Ethernet network. And they actually created a very simple example in that video. So that's just a simple way of, practicing and knowing the hardware. So topic 4C, probably, one of the more straightforward parts of this is explaining network cable types. So we're going to go back into, but there are complicated questions that require some memorization here. It's worth memorizing. We have the unshielded twisted pair, often called the UTP, copper wire cabling carrying electrical signals, 4 balanced wire pairs twisted at different rates and balanced to reduce interference. Single signal attenuation limits maximum distance to 100 meters. 4 pairs of conductors. This is for carrying electrical signals. Then we have the shielded twisted pair, screening or shielding as extra protection against interference. It's used for 10 gig Ethernet in data centers for higher reliability. Used when cabling is near external interference sources. Screened cable has one thin outer foil shield around all pairs. All right. Fully shielded cabling has a braided outer screen and foil shielded pairs. Shield elements in cable, connector, and patch panels must be bonded. All right, so that's the shielded. So here we have the unshielded, then we have the shielded. So just make sure you go back and review those differences. Then we have CAT standards. We have the CAT 5, the 5E, the 6, and the 6A. And if you're going to notice here, we have the max transfer rate, the max distance, and the network application. You know, one thing to focus on here is the difference between, you know, I would look at this and break it down a little bit like this: the 5 and the 5E together, and the 6 and the 6A together. So you have the 5, which was 100 megabytes per second, and then you have the 5E, which is 1 gigabytes per second. So the E, definitely an upgrade from that 5. So the difference you want to make sure you know is the megabytes per second from 100 to 1 gigabyte per second. Then the distance is essentially the same, right? And the distances are all the same on these, except for that 6 to 6A change was almost double, right, in terms of distances. But many of these, like these 6 and 6A, are based on 10 gigabit internet, right? So you have 100 base T, 100 base TX, 100 base T, 100 base T. So these two, 5 and 6, are, you know, based on the first one. So you just want to make sure, like, you review these differences, and where do they have the biggest, you know, differences. You know, like, of course, 6A is the newest one. 6 is probably the most common one, because even, you know, the 6A goes longer, but essentially has the same network application, right? This one, the 5E to the 6, is very similar, if you notice, right? Very similar. You know, there wasn't a big gap there. But then you get into this where it's getting more advanced, and we've seen larger changes. So just make sure you start to see the CAT standards. So those are Ethernet cord, you know, network applications, MAC distances, and the maximum data transfer rate. Then we have copper cabling connectors. We have the RJ45 port and the RJ45 connector, which you should be familiar with. And then we have the 8-pin versus the 4-wired pair, you know, that are part of these. So you see the RJ connector, the 568 standard A, the 568B standard. Just kind of be familiar with just lightly how the difference is between the 8, you know, the 8 pins, the 4-wire pairs, and what the differences are. Not so sure you'll get a question on that one. Copper cabling installation tools. This is an important little area to just know about. Patch cords are crimped to RJ45 connectors. This is so that you can take a cable, strip it, remove the installation, terminate to the IDC, and then crimp it, and then add the RJ45 connector. That's a good skill to have, and many network technicians, like working on, you know, if you're working as an entry-level technician, you might get an opportunity to actually do some copper cabling and crimping with a cable stripper and a punched out tool. And if you ever get the chance to do it, or someone offers it to you, take that opportunity, because it's a good chance to then, you know, do it and have it as an experience. All right. Just know the tools you need as well. The cable stripper to remove the installation, the punch down tool to terminate to the IDCs, and the crimper. You know, so the patch cords are crimped to our RJ45 connectors, so they need to be able to be plugged in. Structured cable is terminated to installation displacement connect. Insulation displacement connect is what the IDC means. All right. Then there are testing tools to test the connection, validate and test cable installation. You know, verify termination, cable tester, toner probe to trace a cable, loopback plug, test an NIC or switch port. Just be familiar. Network taps, capture network traffic, passive test access point, active tap, mirror port. Copper cabling installation consideration, installation to plenum spaces. You know, what are the building fire safety regulations? What is plenum rate cable? No, do look that up. Have that as a vocab word. Plenum rated cable. Installation as outside plant. Aerial conduit and direct burial. So how would you do this outside? Okay. Protection against weathering. Optical cabling. So fiber optic cables carry more data than RJ45s, all right? So, or Cat 5, all right? Not RJ45s, that's the, you know, where you're gonna crimp and attach them to, but not these. These are optical cabling. These are gonna carry more data through fiber. Fiber optic cable types, you have single mode fiber, SMF, and then you have multi-mode fiber, MMF. And then you have connector types. You have the straight tip, subscriber connector, and then the lucent connector. So definitely make sure you understand the lucent connector, straight tip, and subscriber connector, and look at the differences of those. And then you have coaxial cable, which is actually very fast. A lot of people still have it in their homes, like, you know, with their network cabling, you know, coming in from the street. A coaxial cable has that F-type connector, that screw with the single hole with a single piece of metal. Just know what that is. Also know that it's pretty fast. There's a reason why they use it, you know, to bring the network into your home. Here's a review activity for network cabling. Understand the differences between twisted pair and shielded twisted pair, the CAT standards like we talked about, copper cabling connectors, copper cabling installation and test tools, the network taps, copper cabling installation considerations, optical cabling, coaxial cabling. So let's go into now, this is the last section of topic 4D, comparing wireless network types. So you can see chapter 4 is a deep lesson. There's lots in here on wireless, on network in general, cable types and types of networks. So access points, a very important piece of hardware to know. So access points are important to know because they're essentially everywhere. They provide wireless internet in different buildings, in offices, all over the place. They're coming off the switches. So we have IEEE 802.11 Wi-Fi. If going back, that was one of the network types. Remember that. The infrastructure mode, WLAN. Access point interconnects wireless clients, stations. So, this is where your laptop's going to connect to a wireless access point in a room. Infrastructure basic service set, BSS. Basic service set identifier, BSSID. The MAC address of AP radio can bridge with wired network via a switch. So off the switch, you're going to get these connected to, so you could have a wired network coming off a switch, and then you can bridge that wired network to these and then extend it as a wireless network. 802.11a and the 5 gigahertz frequency band. So this is important to note too, is the differences between the 2.4, 5, okay? So better propagation, but fewer channels and greater interference risk at the 2.4. 5 gigahertz, shorter range, but less congested. IEEE 802.11a, 54 megabytes per second, 23 times non-overlapping 20 megahertz channels, dynamic frequency selection and regulatory impacts. So even though you have these ranges and these types of frequency bands, you will have things that just won't run sometimes on certain frequencies. So just keep that in mind. You know, especially older iPads and newer iPads, for example. 802.11b/G and the 2.4 gigahertz frequency band. You have the IEEE 802.11b, like 11 megabytes per second, 14.5 megahertz channels. The Wi-Fi still needs 20 megahertz channel bandwidth. So, you know, just take a look at the channel and the bandwidth. Channels require careful configuration to avoid overlap. So you see where they need to be avoided overlap. IEEE 802.11G, 54 megabytes per second, 802.11b compatibility mode. So just start to, when you look at these two, you have the 11b and the 11g. What's the difference in megabytes per second, difference in channels, the difference in the bandwidth, and how do they need to be configured for overlap or not to overlap? All right, key questions there. So 802.11 dual band radios that have both 40 megahertz channel bonding, multiple input, multiple output, MIMO. That's a good term to know. Use of multiple antennas to improve reliability and bandwidth. 72 megabytes per stream, Wi-Fi 4. All right. Wi-Fi 5 and 6. This is the difference. This is an important element to know. This is the newer form of Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi 5, 5 gigahertz only. So it was the newer version a few years ago, a while ago. 5 gigahertz only. Tri-band radios, 80 and 160 megahertz channel bonding. Multi-user MIMO, right? Connect stations simultaneously. That was the common Wi-Fi that a lot of people put into buildings 10 years ago. Okay, a little bit more than 10 years ago, they were going crazy with it. Now we're into Wi-Fi 6. Now we have the 2.4, we have the 5, plus the reason why they call it 6 is the new gigahertz band. Download and uplink MU MIMO, orthogonal frequency division, multiple access, OFDMA. So make sure that you double check these terms. You can put them into vocabulary words, you know, things to strengthen your network knowledge, all right? Wireless LAN installation considerations. We have the network name or service set identifier, the SSID, all right? Very important, helps to identify the access point. We have the frequency band use, which one is it using? Same SSID or different SID per band. Operation mode, is it supporting legacy standards? Channel usage, non-overlapping channel width and bonding, all right? And if you see this here, TP-Link, the wireless settings for, you know, a lot of people have this actually within their home, okay? So they're showing the setup of the wireless settings. Then you have Wi-Fi analyzers, software installed to mobile device. Now this is something that you can actually play with. You can set up a Wi-Fi analyzer on your phone and actually review different networks that it's picking up and see the strength of those networks. Report configuration of nearby wireless networks, signal strength on each channel. You can look at the signal strength in decibels, milliwatts, dBm. Negative values with closer to 0 performance. A logarithmic scale, 3 decibels dBm difference represents halving or doubling. Signal to noise ratio. So just that's just a tool that shows you, you know, the Wi-Fi coming off of something and the type of network and it's showing. Long range fixed wireless. Wireless bridges configured using microwave antennas. Line of sight, they have high gain. Wireless bridges, right? Long range fixed wireless, so sending it through some distance. Licensed spectrum use, legal right to remove interference sources, unlicensed spectrum, share use of frequency band, regulatory requirements on power, transmit power gain, and effective isotropic radiated power. Then we have Bluetooth, RFID, and NFC. So these are common terms. We know these are on the exam. Need to know them. Just make sure you do. You have Bluetooth connectivity for wireless peripherals. Then you have radio frequency ID, wireless asset tags, inventory control. And then you also have near field communications for contactless payments. So make sure you understand that that is how contactless payments go through NFC, near field communication. You're going to have a question, which is going to ask you, which type is used when someone purchases something? Most likely. And you're going to want to make sure you know it's the near field communications, all right? Used for payments. So here's the review activity for wireless networking types. Access points, the 802.11a and the 5 gigahertz frequency band, what's the difference? The 802.11b/G and the 2.4 gigahertz frequency band, what's the difference? Then you have the 802.11n, the Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 6, wireless LAN installation considerations, Wi-Fi analyzers, what do they do? Long range and fixed wireless, like what are the considerations for that? And Bluetooth, RFID, and NFC, what's the difference and where are they used? The lab activity associated with this is to use the same GNS3 network simulator configure Wi-Fi networks, not the connected networks. So that is it for lesson 4. So we made pretty good time for such a long lesson, but there's a lot of content here to go through, review, make sure that you know. You can always start with the review activities and also the summary, as well as the objectives for each lesson and also sections. I also suggest if you go through it, make sure that you definitely go to a page like this, the review activity, and use that as like your guide to know how confident you feel with that particular section of the lesson. You know, there's a network, there's the review activities, there's lots of vocabulary within here. I think what I'll do is I'll actually, you know, do something with the acronyms maybe for next week, but there's enough in here of stuff to kind of go through and learn and make sure you know. Essentially, you could create a, you know, multiple flashcards for just every single slide here, if you wanted to, related to terms, if you needed to make sure that you understood. But there's a lot here to kind of cover network configurations and setups and cabling, comparing hardware. Just make sure you go through it, you take your time, and you start to understand the differences in the networks, what those differences mean, and why you need to know them. And definitely the questions that I mentioned are, you know, are pretty much on most of the Core 1 exams. So thank you for checking it out with me and reviewing lesson 4.